I'm about to start writing a new novel, and in today's video, I wanted to talk about the 5 strategies I'll be using to write a novel that is both marketable and readers will love and be obsessed with. And overall, hopefully, it creates a best selling book. So, we are going to be breaking things down into 2 different categories. We have the writing perspective of things, and then we also have the marketive perspective of things. Now, these strategies, I used 4 of the 5 strategies when I was writing my latest book, The Trail to You and Me, and I found it not only helped me write the book, but it also made selling it a lot easier. So, all these strategies I'm about to talk about are things you should implement before you even sit down to outline the book, because I feel like if you think about all these things ahead of time before you start outlining and then writing the book, you're more likely to have a lot of success with your book. So, let's find out. My name is Mandy Lynn. I'm an author, book cover designer, and the creator of the Book Launch Planner series, and I make weekly videos on the business of being an author. So, if that sounds good to you, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification icon so you never miss a new upload. I just wanted to pause the video to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp is a platform that can connect you with many different licensed therapists on their website. As a new mom, I know how important it is to put your mental health first, and BetterHelp is a great way to get started. So if you're someone who's been considering starting therapy, make sure to go to betterhelp.com/MandyLynn and fill out their questionnaire. Once you fill out the questionnaire, you're usually matched with your therapist within 48 hours. And then you can decide if you want to message them or do a video chat or do a phone call, whatever you are most comfortable with. Again, to get started, go to betterhelp.com/MandyLynn. That's betterhelp.com/MandyLynn. Thank you again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. So let's dive in and talk about the different strategy. First things first, we'll talk about things from the writing perspective. So besides everything that I'm about to talk to today, your book, of course, has to be well written, and that's something that just comes with a lot of time. So I just want to let you know that if you use all these other strategies that I talked to today, it might still not be a best-selling book if the book itself isn't well written. So that is always got to be at the forefront. It's something that comes with time. The more you write, the better you'll get at writing. So, just keep on writing. But let's go ahead and talk about the first strategy. Strategy number 1 is a story structure. Your book needs to have fantastic story structure. And to accomplish that, that's where Save the Cat comes in handy. I personally enjoy Save the Cat Writes a Novel by Jessica Brody. There's a few different versions of this book. It was originally written for screenplays. There's also a young adult version of this book, so if you're an author of young adult books, you can check that out. Basically, it just analyzes stories, breaks it down into story beats, because when you look at different books and movies, you start to realize there's a very specific pattern and there's very specific reasons why readers or viewers engage with the story well, and it's because they follow this very specific plot structure. Now, you may say, like, oh, if I follow a plot structure, my book's not going to be original. That's not the case, because the structure is very loose and you can apply it to your story in many different ways. Anyways, this is a great book for outlining. I used it to outline my book, Meet Me at the Summit. I used it to outline my book, Let the Rebel Fall, The Trail to You and Me, and I'll also be using it to outline my next book. If you don't know what story beats are and you don't know what the specific Save the Cat story beats are, highly recommend checking it out. I'll leave the book linked down below. Strategy number 2 is universal fantasies. So again, we have another book that I will talk about. I swear this is the last book resource that I'm going to talk about. But I highly recommend checking out 7-Figure Fiction by T. Taylor. And it is how to use universal fantasy to sell your book to anyone. So, what is universal fantasy? Universal fantasy is just kind of what people daydream about almost. There's probably a better way to describe it. But you're writing about what someone else fantasizes about. So, for example, say you are someone who's always been like, oh, I wish I was confident enough to go up to a stranger and flirt with them and have it go well. That's a universal fantasy, and then you can write about that universal fantasy in your rom-com where a person goes up to a stranger and flirts with that stranger. Basically, you use universal fantasies to make readers absolutely obsessed with your book because they are reading your book and living out their daydreams. So if you haven't read Seven Figure Fiction yet, make sure to check it out. This also is a very inspiring book, in my opinion. I used it when I was writing The Trail to You and Me, and I had so many extra ideas to how to make my book better. After I wrote every single chapter of The Trail to You and Me, I would try to identify the different universal fantasies that were in each chapter. And if I couldn't identify a universal fantasy in a chapter, I made sure to add one in. That way, I always had readers hooked in. And that's a good way to get an emotional response out of readers. Okay, so we've talked about the writing side of things. Let's go ahead and talk about the marketing side of things. Let's talk about strategy number 3, which is your comp titles. Now, comp titles is also known as comparative titles. They are something you use when you're marketing your book. So say you wrote a book and you're trying to describe it to a friend. You could say, oh, it's like Harry Potter, but it takes place in the 50s or something like that. Harry Potter would be a comp title. So comp titles are normally something that people tend to think about way after they've already written the book and they're now trying to sell the book. And this is something that I want you to think about before you even outline your book. Because if you're able to identify your comp titles early on, you can also identify what makes that comp title work. So everyone loves Twilight, not because of the sparkling vampires, but because it really captures what it's like to fall in love for the first time. So if I had Twilight as a comp title, I would want to make sure that first love feeling is what was in my book. Now, if your book does have vampires, you can still use Twilight as a comp title, but what made Twilight successful wasn't the vampires. What made Twilight successful was the feeling that it evoked from readers. So you want to make sure that that feeling is in your book when you're writing it. So these are all things you want to be mindful of before you start writing, so you can really make sure that you're evoking that from readers. Strategy number 4 is to identify your tropes. So tropes are just common themes, ideas, or plot points of a book, and usually they're like either one word or just a couple of words. So enemies to lovers, love triangle, fish out of water, those are all different tropes that can be in your book. In fact, this is a little graphic that I made of my book, The Trail to You and Me, to identify the tropes in that book. And then I did the same thing with Meet Me at the Summit, and then also Let the Rebel Fall. So tropes are just something that you can use to easily tell the reader, these are the types of plot points that are in the book. So if readers love enemy to lovers and your book has an enemies to lovers element, they will know that if they pick up the book, they will probably like it. Again, this is a marketing thing, and usually something that people think about long after they've already finished and maybe after they've already published the book, but I want you to think about it before you even outline the book, because maybe you sit down and outline your book and realize you only have one really popular trope in your book, and that could make it a little bit hard to sell. And maybe you want to add in other tropes, like falling in love with your best friend's brother. I can only really think of romance tropes, but that's because I tend to write romance these days, but you guys get the idea. I, for one, when I'm outlining, tend to look up a long list of popular book tropes and use that list of book tropes to be like, oh, how can I work that into my book? Because it's a very popular way to market books these days, is just making graphics that say what your book's tropes are. And in case you're curious, I found a list created by Kindlepreneur that is a long list of book tropes. Now, in case you're curious, I will leave the link to this article of book tropes in the description of this video. But Kindlepreneur also has this software called Publisher Rocket. You're able to use this software to look up different keywords, and any books that use those keywords, you can also see like how much income those books generate. So you can see, you know, maybe enemies to lovers are a very highly profitable keyword, or fish out of water might be a highly profitable keyword. But that way you're writing a book that you know will sell super, super well. I will leave that article linked down below in case you want to learn more about it. I will also leave Publisher Rocket link down below. I am an affiliate for Publisher Rocket, so if you end up buying the software, it's greatly appreciated if you use my affiliate code. I will also link down below, I have a YouTube video where I talk about how I use Publisher Rocket to identify keywords and categories for my books. But yeah, what I'm trying to get at is when you think of marketing before you even outline your book, you will find it much easier to sell your book later on. And lastly, we have strategy number 5, which is to write the pitch first. Now, I have always intended to write my book blurb or my book's pitch before I start outlining my book, but I've just never gotten around to it because it's not something that's like required, so I just got lazy and would skip that step. But I feel like it's important to write your pitch before you start outlining your book because you can really think about things from a selling it to a reader perspective. Because at the end of the day, if you're someone who's trying to make money off of writing books, you do have to think of it from a marketing business perspective. So a pitch is just trying to sell your book to a reader in 2 to 4 sentences. Ideally, it's usually called an elevator pitch because you only have the time that you are in an elevator with a stranger to talk about your book and sell it to them. So it's not the full back cover blurb that is on the back of your book. It's just a couple of sentences that sum up your book and really make readers enticed. And I think it's important to come up with this pitch so you can try to make your book as enticing and intriguing as possible before you even sit down to outline it. So then when you're outlining, you can always look back to your pitch and be like, okay, how does this chapter add to the pitch that I've written? How does this really make readers want to keep reading the book? And then hopefully by the time they get to the end of the book, tell other people about it. And the reason I say this is because I've had it in the past where I would write a book, I would finish writing it, and then I'd sit down to write the pitch or the blurb. And sometimes I would want to change details of the book when I was writing the blurb or writing the pitch because it would make things sound more interesting. But then I'd be like, but that's not what actually happened in the book. And then I would kind of have some regrets as a writer and realize I would have to go back and edit things to make it more interesting, like the way I wanted to make the pitch more interesting. Maybe that's just me that writes that way, but it's something I intend to do with this next book. Anyways, those are my 5 strategies to write a hopefully best-selling book. These are the different things that I will be doing when I'm writing my next book, which hopefully by the time you're watching this video, I'm deep in the writing trenches. But to be totally honest, I have a 6-month-old daughter, and we will see just how productive I get with her around. Anyways, that is going to be it for this video. If you have any requests for future videos, let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I'll see you all in the next video.